It happened on Valentine's Day, 3 years ago, and to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with that night. I still haven't told anyone the full details, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. I was living alone at the time, in a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't the nicest place, but it was mine, and I loved the solitude. It was a dreary February night, the kind where the rain falls like a steady hum, and the streets look too empty, like the world is holding its breath. I had just gotten home from work and planned to spend the evening alone, watching movies, maybe having a glass of wine. Valentine's Day had never been a big deal to me, and I didn't have any special plans. It was just another night, or so I thought. Around 8 p.m., I was curled up on the couch, sipping my wine, when I heard a knock on the door. It was unusual. No one really visits me, especially not at that time, so I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was that it was a delivery or maybe a neighbor. But as I got up and peered through the peephole, I saw a figure standing on the other side. A man, early 30s maybe. He wore a dark coat and a fedora, the kind of hat you might expect from a 1940s detective in an old black and white film. I couldn't see his face well, but there was something unsettling about the way he stood perfectly still, staring at the door like he was waiting for something. I hesitated for a moment before asking, "Can I help you?" There was no answer, just more stillness. "Hello," I said again, my voice wavering just slightly. The hairs on my neck stood up. Something felt wrong. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke in a soft, almost whispering tone. "Happy Valentine's Day." That's when I noticed it. His hand, slowly lifting to the door, revealing a red rose clutched in his fingers. The petals were wet, like he'd been holding it in the rain, but there was no mistaking it. He was offering it to me. I didn't know what to say. I had no idea who this man was, but the creepy vibe radiating from him made my stomach twist. "Who are you?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. He didn't answer right away, just stood there staring at the rose. His face was still shadowed by the brim of the hat, but I could make out the outline of his mouth, twisted into something like a grin. And then, as if on cue, he leaned in slightly, just enough so his lips were nearly touching the crack in the door. He whispered, "You don't remember me, do you?" I froze. My mind raced trying to figure out if this was some sick joke, but I couldn't recognize him. Not one part of me could place this stranger. "No," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. Then, without a word, he lowered his hand and turned to leave. He walked down the hallway slowly, never looking back. I watched through the peephole until he disappeared around the corner of the building. I stood there for a long time, my hand still on the door, unsure of what had just happened. I didn't open the door, but I felt this weird urge to check the hallway. Was he still out there? Was it some kind of prank? Eventually, I convinced myself to brush it off. It was probably just some odd Valentine's Day stunt. Maybe a neighbor had played a prank on me. But the feeling stayed with me. It gnawed at me, deep in my gut, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. The next day, I went to work, trying to forget about the strange encounter. But when I came home that evening, something was different. My apartment door was slightly ajar. I swear I had locked it before leaving, but now it was open just enough for me to see a shadow on the floor inside. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stepped in slowly, the silence overwhelming. The apartment felt wrong, like someone had been there. It wasn't until I reached the kitchen that I saw it, the rose. It was sitting on the counter, the same rose, the one from the night before, Only now, the petals were darker, almost brown, as if they had been left out for days, decaying. And in the center, there was a small note, folded and creased. I hesitated before picking it up. It read, "I know what you did." I stared at the words, my hands shaking and my mind racing. That was all it said. Nothing more. I don't know what it meant. I don't know how he got inside or how he knew about me. Every day since then, I've felt like I'm being watched. It's like something's following me, waiting for me to make a mistake. That man, whoever he was, is still out there, and I can't stop wondering. What did he mean by that note? I still don't know, and part of me is afraid to find out. Every Valentine's Day, I lock my door, check the peephole, and pray that I don't see him standing there again. But I can't shake the feeling that one day he'll come back, and I won't be able to hide. It happened a few years ago, on Valentine's Day. I don't know why, but every year since, the date still sends a shiver down my spine. I've never shared this story with anyone because, honestly, I'm not sure I believe it myself, but here it is. I was living alone in a small apartment at the time. It wasn't the nicest place, but it was mine, and I was content with it. I had just gotten out of a pretty rough relationship, so this Valentine's Day was the first I'd spent completely solo in years. It should have been a quiet day. I had planned to just watch some Netflix, order pizza, and drown myself in chocolate. But it didn't go as planned. It was around 8 p.m. when I heard a knock at my door. Not a usual knock, almost like a soft tap, tap, tap. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked through the peephole and saw no one. That's when I thought, maybe it's just a delivery mistake. I stepped back from the door, but as I did, there was another knock. This time, louder. My heart skipped. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I didn't want to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. I slowly turned the handle and opened the door just enough to peek outside. There was a small, wrapped package sitting on the doormat. No note, no name, just a plain red box tied with a white ribbon. For a moment, I stood there, staring at it. I didn't know what to think. Who would leave something like that on my doorstep on Valentine's Day? But the silence around me was unnerving, like something was waiting. I bent down to pick it up, glancing up and down the hall. No one was in sight. I closed the door behind me and went back to my couch, the box resting in my hands. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of secret admirer, but the more I thought about it, the more I didn't like the idea. I had no idea who it could be. I carefully untied the ribbon, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled open the box. Inside there was a single red rose. It was perfect, almost too perfect. The petals were unnaturally smooth and deep red, and the stem was wrapped in a velvet ribbon. I reached in to touch it, but something about it felt wrong. The rose wasn't real. It was made of wax. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, shaking my head at my overactive imagination. But then I noticed something else at the bottom of the box. A small, folded note. It was written in what looked like black ink, but the handwriting was off. The letters were sharp, jagged, as if the person had been in a hurry. "I see you." I froze. A chill ran down my spine. "I see you." It didn't make sense. How could someone see me? I hadn't heard anything outside my apartment. I hadn't seen anyone in the hallway. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and suddenly, the room felt much colder. I tossed the note and rose aside, grabbing my phone to call someone, anyone, just to hear a familiar voice. But as soon as I reached for the phone, my front door creaked open, just slightly, enough to make a sound. I shot up from the couch, heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard anyone come in. My mind raced, and I immediately checked the locks on the door. It was still latched. I stepped cautiously toward the door, my breath shallow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That's when I saw it. Right in front of my door, just on the edge of my vision, a faint shadow moved. It was a figure, but it was almost impossible to see. The lighting in the hallway outside was dim, and there was no one there when I peeked through the crack. But the figure, if it was even a figure, seemed to fade in and out of sight. The air felt heavy, thick, like I was being watched from all around. I backed away from the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. But then something in the hallway moved, a soft scrape like someone dragging something across the floor. It wasn't coming from the door, it was coming from behind me. I turned to look, my pulse racing, but there was nothing there. No one, no sound, just the oppressive silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw shadows darting at the edge of my vision. Every creak, every tap of the floor made my heart jump. I kept hearing that soft, dragging sound, but when I would turn around, there was never anyone there. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I convinced myself it had all been my imagination, just the eerie atmosphere of Valentine's Day getting to me. I tried to brush it off, but when I opened the blinds to let in the morning light, I noticed something. There, in the snow beneath my window, was a single red rose. It wasn't the same one from the night before. It wasn't even close. This one was fresh, a real rose, but it was stained with something dark, something that looked almost like blood. I never found out who left the gift that night, and I never will. But every year, on Valentine's Day, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me, a presence that lingers, waiting for the right moment to return. And every year, without fail, I find a single red rose on my doorstep. No note, no explanation, just that same unnerving feeling. And this year, it came a little earlier than usual.